Welcome, listeners, to www.IronRadio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. This is Iron Radio. I'm Phil Stevens. I am a strength coach, a powerlifter, a Highland Games athlete, and youth football coach.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike Nelson, Associate Professor at the Carrick Institute, creator of the Flex Diet and the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. Opens September 18th again. And I'm also helping a new ketone ester company, Tecton, do some research on ketones.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
This is Coach Jarrell of Strength Guild Weightlifting in Kansas City. Mostly weightlifting, general strength and conditioning coach, but sometimes I moonlight as a powerlifting or man coach.
And gym owner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we pick and choose, don't we? Pick and choose. Yeah, because I've thought about that. I thought about Mike. And you're a writer now, you know. I mean, you've always been a writer, but
yeah,
you book
officially.
Yeah, right. Yeah, getting paid currently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I am Lonnie Lowry. I'm a longtime professor, about 20 years, just adjunct now, food and academic industries consultant. Still lifting, former competitive bodybuilder, still lifting, creaking and grinding, but refusing, to stop, fighting the longer feet.
That's what I was having a conversation because I've been losing weight recently, and then I was talking to, it was 3 different guys yesterday that we haven't talked to each other in a while, but they were all like in my weight range and age range, in the 275 to 308, and every one of us are at like 230 something.
Oh,
and
wow.
We're all like, and we didn't know it. We didn't know what each other were doing. We're like, man, we're getting near 50. We can't do this forever, right? And it's all of us is doing it for health matters. It's like, yeah. And it's a struggle. I'll tell you what, it's a struggle because I look at myself and I'm like, yesterday we lifted. I was like, whew, that was a lot harder than it used to be. But you got to just,
That's funny.
On the prize.
The way you frame that, you frame it by strength. I look at muscle mass like it's like an identity shift. I'm like small.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's definitely that too. It's like I'm wearing an extra large shirt now. This is weird.
Yeah.
So,
some of my old clothes are baggy, and I'm just like, harsh realities. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I know a buddy of mine. He's very concerned for family health reasons about losing muscle. He's watched some loved ones waste away with cachexia and stuff, and so he stays big. But the price is you keep your power belly, and I personally wasn't willing to do that. Like, into my late 50s and 60s and hopefully beyond, time to get small, I guess.
Yep. Well, and those blood markers, it's like after age 40, stuff starts happening that didn't happen before.
Oh, amen.
That's like when I went to the doctor and my first time that my blood pressure and stuff was up. I was like, oh, that's never been a thing.
Even my cholesterol, which, by the way, you got to be really careful. Like my cholesterol the last couple of times has been 200, flagged high, because that's the beginning of the high range. And yet you get these mid-level health practitioners, and they're just kind of, my doc doesn't do this, right? But they're like, oh, you got to watch this. Do you want to talk to a dietitian? No. On so many levels, no. Yeah. But especially because that's borderline. But you're right, borderline high blood pressure, borderline high cholesterol. I'm like, my cholesterol used to be like 160 total all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Just fussing, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. Especially with visceral fat, too. I mean, I think that the more I read about that, the more I think that it appears to have a bigger effect, too. So if you're one of those people who, as you're heavier, tend to carry more visceral fat, at least from some blood work I've seen on people and other stuff anecdotally, that just seems to have a higher cost associated with it, too.
Oh, yeah. More metabolically active in a very bad, inflammatory way.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's a good segue, and we didn't do that on purpose. I have one piece of science, and it's about inflammation, this time with red meat. So I'm going to ask the guys about how they do red meat these days, if they've changed it all over the years. But this is brand spanking new, like published August 31st. So like days old. It says untargeted metabolomic investigating links between unprocessed red meat intake and markers of inflammation. This is Alexis Wood and colleagues. Again, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition is arguably the summit of nutrition journals. Background here: whether red meat consumption is associated with higher inflammation or confounded by increased adiposity remains unclear. Plasma metabolites both capture the effects of diet after food is processed and digested and absorbed. These blood markers, right, can correlate with markers of inflammation and help us clarify diet-health relationships. So if I just jump to the results, neither processed nor unprocessed forms of red meat were associated with any markers of inflammation. And again, that's so different from what you hear in the lay media, I think. It says, however, in analyses that are adjusted for body mass index, because they're getting to Mike's point just now about, especially visceral fat and gut fat, but, higher fat people in general, also just more inflammatory. It says, when adjusted for BMI, unprocessed red meat was inversely associated with some of these metabolites that are linked to inflammation. So conclusions, our analysis was unable to support a relationship between either processed or unprocessed red meat and inflammation over and above any confounders from body mass index. So they're saying it's body fatness, it's not the red meat. Mm-hmm. And again, I've said this for years, even with my dietetics colleagues. High protein diets are not Big Mac diets, right? Or red meat. What do you mean by red meat, right? Because there's a lot of baggage that comes in a highly processed fast food kind of burger joint. The meat is like pink goo, as I've heard, pressed into patties, and the fats are junk fats. And there's a lot of other stuff going on than just the red meat, right? I mean, that's a far cry from grass-fed round steak, I'll tell you that. And, some of the protein, if you want to just look at a nutrient rather than a food product like red meat, but always ripped on. And again, what do you mean by red meat? Let's operationally define this stuff, because it doesn't have to mean the fast food burger or bologna and hot dogs. There's lots of ways to do it. So this is yet another piece of the puzzle as far as I'm concerned. And again, if anything, it's saying there's some inverse markers with some of these inflammatory red flags, if you will. So let me ask you guys, Phil, I think you do a lot of this yourself. I mean, you have the gentleman's farm kind of thing, or do you still do that?
No, I still do. And that's like, I was just in a conversation the other day with, like, I have now, what did I do? I've processed my own pig, I've processed my own sheep, my own goats, my own deer, and I processed my first cow by myself, which was that was a whole different level of large animal.
Wait, by yourself?
Yeah.
You did not send it to like a dude?
No.
I did it myself. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, and this was out of the blue. So this one, what happened was a rancher I know called me, and one of his cows got injured to the point where, like, they could have potentially saved it, but like, the chances were low that it would make it. And he's like, I'll sell it to you. It's like, okay, let's do this.
Nice.
And and then so I processed it, because I'd done deer and stuff, which is not bad. You're talking about a 140-pound carcass.
Yeah.
But when you're talking hundreds of pounds of carcass, it's just a whole different level. But so we do it ourselves, and so I still do all that. It's just trying to get as close to my food as I can. So
that's close.
That's real close. Yeah. I'll tell you what, though. I mean, I really think it changes your aspect. It changes your outlook on food.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like, it's not just a package you go buy in the store anymore. You have a deeper care for it. And even my kids, like, they understand. Like, all parents preach, don't waste your food, Like, when they see that food walking and they've had to feed it, and then there's a greater realization of what your food is. As far as meat, at least. Not plants, I suppose. Like, you go pick, whatever. Or you pick strawberries and the plant comes back next year. The cow doesn't come back. So, and I don't know. It's just, I enjoy it. And It's just the way we do things.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
As far as like how we address, like I usually don't even address it at all, pretty much. I mean, how I personally address red meat is medium rare typically, but I don't really do it with my clients because that's like the lowest hanging, like that is like way, not the lowest hanging fruit. That's like down the line in terms of like things that they're eating or doing that are problematic. Red meat is not very high on my list, even if there is some like something to, the inflammatory, whatever. I mean, there's other stuff that comes first in terms of like when I look at someone's nutrition or look at their diet, there's a lot of other stuff we can do before that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Also, some of it, like the way we set our numbers, like if they're, cutting or losing weight, the numbers kind of take care of it for us. Like you just can't eat as much like fatty cuts of meat, when you get your diet to prioritize, carbs, protein, and then, moderate fats is typically how, like, that's like my general philosophy towards cutting, especially when you're training, is to prioritize the carbs. So you have to, actually pick a day almost to have like a fatty cut of meat. So it kind of takes care of itself in our system, but.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's kind of on the same topic. Did you guys see Kevin Hart decided to do a sprint competition against somebody and he like ripped everything in his legs?
Oh.
Anyways. Like he hadn't done it. Well, anyways, this doctor came on and I didn't know this, but apparently Kevin is a vegetarian. And this doctor came on and he was talking about vegetarians and vegans and, of course, the lack of eating meat. And I guess there was a study done on vegans and their recovery time post-op versus people who ate meat. And their recovery ability and time was drastically increased, and a lot of it was lack of collagen. Like there is no such thing as collagen in the plant world. And he's like, they're not getting it to recover and things like that. But I mean, if people are vegetarians, I've dealt with vegetarian clients and whatever, it's the deal. But I don't know. Like you said, it's in today's world, there's drastic differences in meat even between processed and not processed. And if you even look, that's what they went into this to the difference in even our meat today versus meat 200 years ago. And now it's all, like you said, fed versus corn fed, and they like literally butchered 2 sheep, and one was left to grow up and eat what a sheep would when you leave it on its own, and one was fed. And the difference in the nutrients within the meat, even the color of the meat, the level of fat in the meat, what kind of fats,
what kind,
was drastically different. And that's what they were talking about. They were like, and also the big change was our culture has become like when I go hunting and shoot a deer and people eat it, a great portion of them who have never eaten wild game, the first thing they talk about is how gamey it is and things like that. It's because our culture has been subjected to meat that's like, I don't know, it's bland in comparison. We feed them.
Phil, we've done the same thing with grains. I mean, we strip them and we eat this polished, bran-free, fiber-free stuff because, it's mild. Yes. Just like you're saying with the meat. It's mild and it's pleasant and it's processed, but you're taking, like you said, steps further and further away from nature, and so you start losing stuff. And the point about the collagen in the meat, think about the zoochemicals and, carnosine, and there's tons and tons of nutrients that have been, think food chain concentrated in that meat as it grazes on the low quality plants, right?
Yeah, instead of grass varied diet. It's no different than us as humans.
Right.
If you feed one of us a very limited diet of shit, the meat that makes us up, which, we're essentially a meat, and is not as high quality. We go downhill, and so do the animals. And I don't know. I'm as you guys know, I eat lots of red meat, but we've definitely leaned more towards we look for the quality of the meats we eat and things.
Even eggs.
Huge difference in the eggs we get outside and go to the store.
You can see it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's just this dark, like it's not a yellow yolk. It's like Halloween orange.
All right. Yeah.
So.
The way I do this is I actually eat less red meat than chicken these days. I don't know why. It's just a kick I'm on, probably. But definitely, like, one of the rules that I have, gross rule of thumb, if this is helpful to any listeners, but I'll go for the 90% lean, like ground meat. Any leaner than that, and I just feel like it loses too much flavor, or we're kind of moving down that processed, maybe, if you will, meat, or if it's too fatty, I'm not going for the lowest quality, light pink kinds of stuff that's mostly fat. If it's 2 to 1 protein to fat, that's kind of my rough rule of thumb. But I probably eat red meat, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week at least, and then lots of chicken and that kind of stuff. But I would eat more red meat. It's just a preference thing lately, I guess.
Yeah, I go through that. I think everybody goes through that, though. Like, I'll have stages where I just want chicken. And I'll do the same thing with fish. It's like I am craving fish. Because sometimes that's right where, like, fish is a big one that I go to because I do eat so much red meat. At times it's like, I want something light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know? It's a recipe thing. It's like a recipe.
Yeah, like I can sit down and hammer down a bunch of shrimp or whatever, and it's like it doesn't feel the same. You know, it doesn't sit on you heavy, and like you talked about. I mean, I think it's like you lean towards the 90% meat, and I don't know. This isn't supposed to be a show about like we didn't intend it to be a show about like grass fed and this and that natural meat, but I mean, you had no choice. Like meat back in the day, it was 90% lean. You know, there weren't fat people in there, weren't fat animals. Yeah, there wasn't such thing as fat animal. Yeah. You know, fat animals that's man-made. Like fat cows, like we made that happen. You know, there wasn't naturally fat cows walking around.
Yeah, pump them full of so much corn, you got to give them antibiotics and all that kind of strange stuff.
That didn't exist before humans made it.
You know, Phil, what a good point about the sheep that were twins and how they were raised and one of them was left to. Imagine if we did that with a huge chunk of Americans, right? Because we are separated from nature. We're the sheep that was grown up in an aberrant way. You know, we are marbled muscle, you know, our low quality muscle, no physical activity. We're not exactly free range humans. You know, we don't move. We eat processed junk. Imagine if you took a bunch of twins of that same population and had them do that constantly moving hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle or something like that. Or even like you said, just farming 100 years ago and how different it would look. You know. Mike, I want to ask you, because I know you do.
Oh, yeah.
You go out of your way to address some of these things. You know, I know you've gone fishing for, what is it, salmon, and you've.
Yeah, halibut, yeah.
And you do your, halibut. How do you do this stuff?
So we're pretty lucky. Like, we can get a grass-fed cow from some people we know, either in Minnesota or Wisconsin. So we'll do that once or twice a year, usually a half at a time. And then we'll actually rent freezer space from other people. So we'll just give them part of the meat. We'll like maybe put half of it over there. And then when we need it, we'll, go over their place and bring it over here. So we just got one fridge freezer. We've got a smaller chest freezer in the little furnace room. But so we don't have a ton of freezer space per se. The freezer in the garage is filled with cold water for cold water immersion. And then like weekly, we would still buy chicken from Costco and some of the leaner steaks that they have. I just have this weird thing where I tend not to buy hamburger because in the store, I don't know how many cows and how many things that's from. Like a steak, I know if it's lean, it's probably pretty decent, right? It's not from multiple cows or God knows where. So we tend to, have most of the hamburger grass-fed and where it's from and what fat they add back to it and that type of thing. And then we were pretty lucky. We've gone up to, my uncle lives in Alaska, so we've gone up there before and done some halibut fishing. And even when we're coming back through Colorado, a friend of ours, they were moving back up to Alaska, and we're talking to them, and they're like, "Hey, do you want any sockeye salmon?" We're like, "Yeah." He's like, "We have so much of it, we can't move it because we have to drive all the way up there." So we got a box of sockeye salmon from them and crammed it in our car and drove home with it. So whatever we can do, that is good. But you can still get some other whitefish and other fish like that from the store once in a while on occasion too. So, and like what you were saying, we've noticed the big difference. The first time I ever got grass-fed beef years ago, I think they typically do. I think it's a Highland beef cattle. It's like supposedly the kind of the original ones that were grazed on grass. And we got it, and I remember cutting it up and I'm like looking at it, going, "This looks like venison."
Yeah.
It was
so red,
super dark red, super lean. It did taste quite different. I mean, I like it, but I could see where we made it for some other people, and now I just will ask them ahead of time because we found out not everyone likes that. So it is different, but I tend to prefer it if I had a choice.
Yeah, I think it's what we've been subjected to. Like, if you've lived your whole life doing that, it's and that's back in the day. There was no choice. That's what meat tasted like. Like you talk about people eating mutton and stuff versus lamb. That animal that got older, like I don't know, back in the day, unless they had to, they wouldn't have killed a young sheep.
No,
they want it to be as big as they can. Get as much out of it as they can. And yeah, it's definitely a totally different thing. And the weird thing is nowadays, like here in Kansas, I'm a hunter. Like last year, we went and got several deer, and it's gotten to the point where society doesn't do that so much. They're extending seasons because nobody's hunting. Like we used to have, when I was a kid, there was always a limit. You could have 1 or 2 deer, whatever, depending on the population. Now I can go out and I could go take 8 because nobody's doing it. And because everybody's just going to the store and buying it. And like last year I went and got 150 pounds of ground venison, and it cost me like $37. Well, and then whatever, it's 50 cents for each bullet. So $38, and then my time. And it's like, you can't beat that as somebody that wants good nutritional meat, and like there's a time investment. And luckily I know butchers and things, so what I did years ago was like, hey, I'm about to do this. Can you come over and show me? Because I don't know where these cuts are. And because if not, then a lot of times I'll just turn the whole thing into ground. Like I'm just grinding the whole damn thing up because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, and I don't know. Part of it for me is always there's something about being close to your food and knowing where it comes from. And like our society is so wasteful. And I think that would be I think if everybody at some point in their life had to like process their food, you just get a greater appreciation for it.
That's a good point, especially with kids. Like you don't have to sell them on the idea, because food waste, you're right, is a huge problem in the U.S. Sometimes I'm shocked at the percentage of food that just goes into the garbage. And you don't have to do that when people know better, when they watch it, like you said, that I raised that animal, or I watched it grow, and then I watched Dad have to go through all this processing stuff, with the whatever you do.
Or if you have to go like catch your food, like there's still a part of society that has to like find their food, and they're not going to waste it. They're not throwing anything away. So.
Hey, before we go to break, I wanted to ask Mike, because you've changed over the years. There was a time when you went red meat free, didn't you?
Yeah.
What was that about? What was the change?
Yeah. So for probably 25 years of my life, I didn't eat any red meat. For quite a while, I didn't eat any meat at all. So like when I was going through college, I was technically a vegan for a couple months. That didn't end well. And then in college, you obviously, if you're living on campus, your selection is a little bit more limited. So I did start eating fish and chicken at that point, because I realized in that controlled environment, trying to get enough protein was virtually impossible. Even with dairy and stuff. But for some reason, I never cared for red meat at that time. Like my parents always would make it for holidays and stuff, and we always had access to it at home, and it just never appealed to me for some odd reason. I don't know why. I guess when I was really little, I guess I ate some of it. And then as I started getting into the metabolic flexibility stuff, I was like, well, I should get to the point at least where I could eat red meat if I had to without having any issues. Because you do see, anecdotal reports of people who haven't eaten any red meat for, several decades, and it doesn't really process too well with them per se. So I had, when I went to the Arnold for a long time ago, I think it was when the carnivore beef supplement first came out. It was just basically like a hydrolyzed protein. I'm like, that's so processed. Like, I should be able to handle that at some point. So I did this weird thing where I just left it in my cupboard and would stare at it every day. And one day I'm like, I think this will be all right. So I tried that. That was okay. Tried another one. That was fine. Tried gelatin. That was okay. Collagen was okay. And then my parents bought a half a cow from a guy in Iowa. So we got some of that. And I literally just had like half an ounce. And it was okay. And then a couple weeks later, I could eat like 4 or 5 ounces and was fine. And at that point, oddly enough, I realized I'm like, oh, this actually tastes pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, I didn't want to be the person preaching metabolic flexibility and being taken down by a steak. That doesn't.
I was just thinking that, like, you're a case study of getting your body to adapt in a direction,
right?
Right. By being able to tolerate it and stuff.
Yeah, and so at that point, we're like, oh, so then the following season, we bought half a cow and just kind of scaled up from there. But I mean, I think I've had 2 hamburgers my entire life where I didn't know where they came from. I mean, steak is a little bit different, but so some stuff like that I'm still a little bit weird and picky about. But yeah, now it's pretty much like, oh, I do like it. But I find, like Phil and you guys, that it kind of goes in streaks.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes I'm fine with like the leaner cuts, which I have most of the time. Other times I'm like, just more chicken and fish. And then usually, like right when it starts getting cold, I've got a couple of pieces of the fattier grass cut or grass fed meat, which, I mean, relatively speaking, fattier for grass fed meat. It's not super fatty, but there's a couple of cuts you can get like that. So as soon as it starts getting colder, September, October, I'm excited to make those. But yeah, so it does vary.
Before we go to break, I wanted to bring it back to something Jarrell said too, which is people have much bigger problems than red meat, especially, now you might say, oh, but fast food. Again, that's not the same thing. Define red meat. When I define red meat, I mean cow muscle, lamb muscle. I don't mean the goop and the white bun and more goop and God knows what, or however that process happened. Now, in this particular study, even processed meat didn't seem to be linked to a lot of these inflammatory markers, which is very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
And I would think, again, to Jarrell's point, if you want to look at inflammation, and it's a point in this paper too, it's about how fat you are. It's not about the red meat, at least as far as this piece of evidence. I know this isn't the drop the mic end all be all, but it is in a premier journal, and they're not showing some of these things. And I know different studies find different things. We have to keep investigating, but yeah, the high sugar, obese, there's a lot of other things that are driving inflammation. And again, agreed. Red meat is down that list. And I would think most people that listen to us, they know when they say red meat, they mean, relatively lean, less processed red meat. Mm-hmm. Now, even a burger, to Mike's point, I've actually read before. I know, Mike, you have too. Probably all you guys have, but even with burger versus steak, because they grind it, any surface bacteria, they're kind of mixing that down into the grind. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that doesn't sound right. But at the same time, I cannot give up a juicy burger. I just can't, man. I know.
No, they're delicious. But like you said, that is the one cut that when you go to the store, you're like, I don't know, man. Yeah. How much of this is the little pieces that fell on the floor?
Yeah.
Because that's what they're doing. They're not wasting it.
They're not wasting money.
Well, I know that they do, even with tuna, there's a certain percentage of what they call filth that's allowed in the can. Yep. And I'm like insect parts, and you're like, okay. I don't know. Maybe ignorance is bliss. Maybe I don't want to know. But like you said, Phil, when you grow this stuff on your own and you process it at home and stuff, the limitations of all this stuff. You know exactly what you're putting in your mouth.
Well, yeah. And like Mike was talking about before, like ground beef in the store is generally like it's a mix of 100 different cows.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do it yourself, it's one. That's George. That's ground
processed in the same place by one person. Yeah. A lot less variables.
Yeah, it had a name, arguably.
And it's just a totally different deal. But I mean, like you talked about, I don't think this comes down to just meat. I think it's our vegetables, our bread, like I saw something not long ago that was alluding to that a lot of people's reactions to bread and things is the way it's made now, and it's like all this, everything's fast now. It's quick rise this, quick, and whereas before bread used to take, like there wasn't fast acting yeast, and it would process over hours or days instead of minutes, and like they're saying that like a lot of the glutens were broke down in that process and more digestible due to this long rise time and the action of the yeast and things back then. And now it's like 30 minutes to a loaf of bread. Yeah. And that process is gone. And like you go taste a bun at McDonald's versus something that, like, bread used to be a brick, man. It was hefty and nutty, and it's a totally different thing now.
I don't want to go on a tangent, but coffee's like that too. You have to extract. The extraction from the beans is partly time, obviously temperature and other things, but it's partly time dependent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you imagine some pressurized, extract that you're making your coffee from, and you're just mixing it with water, because people do that, right? They get these coffee extracts. In fact, I tried that last week with a pumpkin spice from Dunkin', I think it was. Oh, no, thank you. That's just my bias, but yeah, even coffee is like that. Like, you can't, the more you try to rush things, it changes the curve. It changes the nutrient curve, if you will, and the extraction and what's left in the cup or on your plate. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry for going over too much on the food stuff, but it opened a whole can of worms, because here's another thing about, maybe it's not the red meat. In this case, even the processed red meat, it might be the other crap that comes with it that's making you obese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And last quick comment on Phil's comment about tissue in humans. Like, if anyone's done any hands-on or massage work on other humans, you definitely notice huge difference in tissue quality. You talk to anyone who's done a lot of that work, you can get a pretty good idea of their nutrition and stress just by feeling their tissue. And then if you've ever done, human cadaver stuff that's not embalmed tissue, so they're not using any protein fixatives or anything, you see a huge variety in different structures and colors and textures, and it's pretty fascinating. I've been able to do that probably 3 times now, and there's been at least probably 20 cadavers in the room at the time, and the amount of variability and how different it looks. And granted, you don't know the backgrounds of any of the cadavers, but it's way more variability than I would have ever expected. Because when you do all embalmed stuff, it looks all the same. But when you do fresh tissue, the amount of differences you see, and we saw a couple that did have some cancers and some really bad stuff, and it's crazy to see the difference if anyone gets the chance to do that.
Well, that's direct evidence of what Phil was saying with the sheep experiment. Like, why would people be any different? Why would you guys are talking about the dark red meat and versus, the lighter stuff from the corn fed or whatever, animals that don't move much, or why would be any different? I mean, being animals ourselves.
I mean, one would have to guess, that 1,000 years from now, like right now we're digging up skeletons and remains from thousands of years ago. Like 1,000 years from now, when they dig up people and do, look at this guy. Like, even one would guess their skeleton's going to be different. Like because 1,000 years ago people were loaded, and now we're in a society of sitting on your ass. And that's like, I know when I got my scans done, even right leg to left leg, because my left leg was the one that was when I got ran over. Like, you could see the difference. You could tell I load my right leg twice as much as my left. And we're talking about a population that's like that comparatively. And like, your lifestyle, what you eat, what you do affects the whole system. So
one thing I look at on DEXA scans of people for online clients and stuff through Rapid Health is big difference between left versus right, even in skeletal structures. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times that'll map to some injuries and some stuff they've got going on too, without even knowing their movement history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So. All right. Well, let's go to break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more.
Sounds good.
Hey everybody, Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. Second, please tell your friends who are longtime loyal listeners that they may see emails that share just the episode link and the show notes. This is a new thing, and we hope it will build community. Third, if you were a supporting member in the past, we may prompt you to resume through PayPal, but we will confirm each and every donor before reinstating that membership category. We'll never just restart your $4 auto payments without agreement from you. And of course, we will accept new members moving forward as well. Starting back slowly and honorably is the goal. And lastly, expect the sister show Nutrition Radio to expand into once weekly 45 to 60-minute episodes with guest co-hosts covering the same nerdy nutrition news that's been broadcast for a few months now in daily 10-minute clips. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
Okay, everybody, we are back. And the topic I want to hit on with strength coaching is, the differences in the population to deal with. What brought this to my attention was, I'm coaching youth football now. And by youth football, I got assigned to our youngest level team. So we're talking second and third graders. And it was my job to come up with a plan. Okay, we're going to teach them this. So I have all these drills and things in mind when I came in there that I expected to be entry level. And day one, I had to burn that and throw it in the trash because, even their level of understanding was well below what I figured it would be. And so we went from, okay, I'm going to do these. Here's my linebacker drills. Here's my wide receiver drills. Here's my running back drills. And then I came in and realized, oh, these kids know nothing. We need to learn what an A gap is before we even do anything, or just literally where to line up. And it got me thinking about a story that Sarah Robles told me. She had the chance to go get coached by Abadjiev. And she went in there with the expectation of, I'm going to get all these gems of knowledge. And she said, I'm lifting. And she said, I did something. And he's like, hey, that thing you just did, don't do that again. And that was his knowledge. He put and it just got me thinking about the, strength coaches at different levels. And he's so used to, basically, he was in a system where, he did not have to touch beginners. Because that was not his job. He got these athletes once they were elite. And so he didn't have to deal with any of that. So it's just the difference in dealing with the population you have to deal with, and there are strength coaches out there that have to deal with, dealing with a complete beginner versus dealing with the elite of the elite. It's totally different in the cues you have to use, in the work you need to do, and then you look at even you look at the hierarchy of skills in strength development. You got flexibility, mobility, power, agility, speed, balance, pure strength. And a lot of times, you get to that higher level, most of that's taken care of. And whereas you're dealing with beginners and usually our biggest thing is oh, geez, you suck at everything. Windler talks about, you don't have a weak point, dude. You're just fucking weak. So we go way back to the basics. And that's what I had to do with the football team. It's okay, I just need to teach these kids how to run. They don't have a fucking clue. And that's our job. And I think as a strength coach, and people don't realize this, especially we talked about last week. I think it was last week when we were talking about people wanting to be a coach at a high level, they want to go from zero to pro. And it's wow, there's this level of understanding you need to get from teaching beginners, and it's just the differences there. I don't know. What do you guys see in the differences of what are the most important things you see, dealing with clients? Let's say you have a total beginner versus an elite athlete. What are the differences you guys see in coaching, and what do you have to deal with at that level?
I would like, just in terms of the scale from beginner to, advanced is like the level of games that we essentially play. Like, so weightlifting is where I have I've had the widest range of experience in terms of like people who are just starting to, literally like a 6-year-old just starting to competing internationally. So I've had the full range, and it kind of like personality wise, notwithstanding, because a lot of times people who make it to elite, you got to like hold them back a lot. Like you got to tell them to chill out a lot.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the games you can play physically, I actually have started kind of trying to like revert back to, and I got this from Sarah Robles as well, which is like relearning the lifts after every cycle to fix the problems. But I try to create, instead of queuing, I try to create little games, to like get them to move the right way and like kind of discover their answers on their own. I think, maybe it's Rob Gray. I think he calls it like a more ecological approach or whatever, in using the environment to influence the learning rather than the other way around. But the level of games that you can play with advanced athletes, and the other thing is, there's a lot less diversity of movement expectation in weightlifting versus football. But, so instead of having to segment the lifts to like two endpoints, like a very short beginning and end, where it's like we do toes and go. We can go floor, from the floor position. We can go tempo. We can mix it up each rep. Like, so we can go, 1 rep from the floor, 1 rep from the hang, off, you just have all these different, essentially tricks you can do. I think of it like, Stephen Curry and how he can, the diversity of ways he can shoot a 3. Versus like when you're teaching someone to shoot, it's like, no, stand right here, do this. Like really, we have very small opportunity of like movement diversity. That way they can just reinforce the right mechanics. And then you just keep building the games out over time. So they like start to influence it a lot better. Like you get better influence. But like kids, or not kids, but beginners, it's like you have, and you're going to have to shorten that point more than you think for a lot of sports. It's just like A to B is a very short endpoint, and they don't have the whole alphabet. They just have, you need A to B, A to B.
Yeah.
And then you might work A, B, C, and try to learn the language that way. That's like my experience is really kind of like you hammer A to B, that's like they see that all the time versus with elite athletes, you can go all the way A through Z and, throw in curveballs the whole time.
Yeah, and I think on my side, it's not just like the biggest thing from pure strength coaching. One of the biggest things I think is just that I see ignored. You see a lot of coaches that have dealt with higher level athletes, and then they have to deal with a beginner, and they don't realize 2 things. It's like that person's just fucking weak. And we need to keep shit basic. Like, you can't expect them to do mobility, agility, and speed drills when they can't move themselves. So there's a level of strength. But then even bigger than that is the mental side. You have these beginners, and generally beginners want to get they want to do advanced shit before they can. Yeah. And it's working that mental side, whereas then you get to the advanced level. I don't know. It's like we talked about. There's this mediocre level when, let's say, powerlifting. Beginners, we keep it basic. At the intermediate level, you do more stuff. You get more complicated. But then once you get to the elite level, like shit gets easy again. Shit gets basic. But it's the mental side of things. Like at the beginning level, and that's where I think a lot of coaches mess up that have dealt with elite athletes. And it's like you talked about. Elite athletes usually I've had to pull them back. At the beginning level, we just need to give them a love of training. Like those elite guys already love it. And they'll practice the basics And that's like I was fighting with my daughter. She's a fairly good boxer, and she's like, "Well, they just keep having me do the basics again and again." It's like, you watch Mike Tyson when he was good. He practiced like they always practice the basics. Steph Curry always practiced the basics, even though they're the elite of the elite. They still do that. And like at the beginning level, it's the understanding that I need to get this kid to love this activity first, and once they love it, then they won't mind doing the basics. They'll understand that. And so it's I'd say at the beginning level is it's much working on their head, maybe even more working on their mental ability than it is their physical. And like you said, you got to learn A before you learn B. And like a lot of them want to skip from A to Z, and like you're not mentally equipped, physically equipped for any of that. You can't do what Patrick Mahomes is doing when you're a 7-year-old kid. You know, we got to teach you how to write your name before you can write a dissertation. You know, so and that's the big thing. I mean, it's learning that part of this stuff. So
yeah, one thing I figured out is I don't do a lot of in-person coaching anymore. I have some people that show up here just by invite only, but the biggest thing I figured out for online stuff from a design perspective, especially for assessments and just kind of an idea of what to work with them, I found if I start with a high level or elite level athlete and go backwards, that works pretty good. If I start with the low level and go forwards, that doesn't always transfer, right? And that's a design principle where if you know, the extremes inform the means, right? So if you've ever been on a piece of like exercise equipment, you'll figure this out real fast, right? So luckily designers have gotten way better on this over the years, but some of the old stuff, the theory was, well, just design for the average height, you know, male, female, whoever's at the gym. And you've ever gotten on a piece of equipment where if you're, you know, taller or shorter, it just feels horrible. Where if you kind of design for, okay, we're going to go up to a, you know, 6'4" person down to a 4'11" person or whatever, right? Then those are your design constraints. And if you hit both those endpoints, odds are like the 5'7" person is going to feel pretty good. So I realized if you design for the elite level athlete, you can just kind of pull stuff out of it and you end up back to, you know, general population or a beginner. But the other way wasn't so true. Like you couldn't start with a beginner and just add more shit to it and expect that it's going to work for an elite level athlete. That was a disaster.
Yeah.
So once I figured that out, then I just had, especially for assessments, just templates for, you know, who would be a high level in that group. And then it was easy. I just, you know, look at it and go, okay, this person doesn't need that. They don't need a 5-day bioenergetic assessment on the rower to figure out where they're at. They just need to do a 2K and see how bad they suck, right? So that was like super useful because then you kind of cover both ends. Because with the beginner, I still want to know where they're at. I want to have some baseline, but I don't need the level of detail because it doesn't matter. And two, they're not going to put up with a 7-day assessment. You know, or if I have, you know, a high level, you know, CrossFit, you know, competitor that wants to go to the games, that is only making it to regionals. Yeah, they'll live on the road for 5 days and write me horrible emails, but they'll get it done. And it's useful and specific to what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. But
I just want to add two things to essentially what I was saying, but when you look at and actually get to either talk to or, you know, experience, you know, high level training, I think most people are generally surprised at how focused they are on the, like what they would consider the basics of whatever the thing is in almost any sport. It's like, you know, some of the stuff that Tom Brady does over and over, people would be like, oh, this seems like, you know, monotonous or whatever. And then number two, the other thing with beginners I wanted to add was they don't really know like what they have or like how deep to go. And part of it's just Mike mentioning CrossFit is like most people haven't really experienced that full like lactic stress before.
Oh yeah.
And like, so they'll get a little out of breath or something. And they're like, oh man, this is like, I'm, you know, and then you put them on the sled or, you know, the bike to like get a true deep lactic response and they're outside puking. And it's like they don't understand their range. And another thing is they don't understand how to control that range within the context of a workout. Like they can't reinforce how they're feeling. They can't say like, all right, I'm getting out of breath. I'm getting out of the aerobic area. I need to, slow down a little bit, learn to pace, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And then I think another big part of it is talking to strength coaches out there. It's the realization that, like, let's say, I don't know, the level of respect I have gained for people that coach at the beginning, the purely beginning level, because they're dealing with, like, basically, if you're at the NFL level, like, let's compare what I'm doing versus Andy Reid. He's dealing in camp, he's dealing with 90 bodies that are already physical and mental specimens. Like, I have kids that, like, okay, I've got 50 beginners. But the variance in my beginners versus the variance in his elite is so wide. Like, I'm dealing with kids they're like, this kid might learn something. He might learn to go to A to B in 1 rep. Whereas Johnny over there takes me 57 things to teach him one. Like, I have one kid that, for God's sakes, like, to get him to go, when we say down and you're supposed to put your hand down, like, it took 57 reps to get him to do that. And that level of, like, oh man, it gives you a respect for these people that are teaching this to athletes to give them to the next coach. Like, the level of patience you need to have at the beginning level. Whereas like I have kids that are, okay, it's time to do our running, and they get 100 yards in and they're crying. Like, if that happened at training camp, it's like, fucking leave. You have to deal with that at a low level. And like I said, part of that is the mentality. You have to build them up and realize, like, okay, Blake, you're still breathing. That means you're not dead. Like, the running didn't kill you. It was hard. And you, like, getting them to realize simple things. And I think coaches lose that. Like, when a coach is taught at the high level so long, they lose an ability a bit to teach at the low level because they're so used to that population. And like, even coaches ended up getting specified because of the population they deal with. And that's where I think also a lot of lower level coaches, I'm talking lower in the people they deal with, not like their ability. Like, they struggle you see it all the time. People, like, some guy gets hired to go to the NFL and all he's done, I forget, there was a coach that did this. He was like a high school coach. Like, he doesn't know how to deal with that population. He's used to relating with an intermediate level population. So it's going to take him time to adjust his skill set to the population he's working with, because it's Phil, so drastically different.
As you talk, I'm thinking of this metaphor, like, these elite coaches, they're teaching poetry, and you're talking about teaching introductory language to a bunch of immigrants, right?
Yeah,
If they say the word wrong, they get electric shock.
But I think that's a big reason why, as you see coaches move up, like, they say, like, oh, this guy was great at the high school level, but they moved him up and they thought he'd be great at the NBA, and he gets there and he fails. And a lot of that is population specificity. He needs time there. He's used to dealing with a different level of athlete. And it's not that he sucks. It's just that he got really good at dealing with that level of athlete. As a coach, it even takes us time. Like, and that goes back into the topic the other day. It's like, you can't go from step A to step Z. And some people never make it. Maybe as a coach, you have the mentality to deal with beginners and not the mentality to deal with elite athletes. It's not a failure. It's just what you're good at and what you've been exposed to. So, anyway, it's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, what comes back down to the SAID principle, right? Specific adaptation to imposed demand. If all your reps is built around coaching third graders, yeah, you get really good at coaching third graders and younger, newer athletes. That doesn't mean instantly you're going to coach elite people. It doesn't mean you can't coach elite people. It just means that it's like anything else. It's going to take you some reps to figure it out.
Yeah. Yep. And what those people need is totally different. And it's, coaching isn't coaching. So
it's a good point.
All right. Well, I suppose that's it. Everybody go eat red meat.
Yeah, long weekend.
Find some.
Oh, that's right. Chance
to
grill. Hit the grill.
Yeah.
Exactly. Go catch something.
Catch it first. Catch
it over a fire.
Yep. You bastards.
Catch it, and then light a fire by rubbing two sticks together.
We got lots of wild turkeys around here. They're just running down the street.
There you go. Just pounce on one. Bare hands.
Yeah.
All right, see you guys.
Yep.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.